With this week's Torah reading, the double portion of Tazria and Metzora, we enter into a whole world of mystery, of Tuma and Tahara ritual purity and impurity surrounding the issue of what's known as saras. It's an affliction which is translated often as leprosy, but leprosy is a physical ailment and this is a spiritual ailment. So these two Torah readings, these two parshiot of the Torah, are remote to us. We have no experience with them. But let's see what they involve just as an overview. They involve the appearance of a blemish, and it could happen on a person's home, it could happen on their clothing, or it could happen on their person. And it has to be investigated by the Kohen. And when the Kohen, it meets specified criteria, which are outlined in Mishnayos, but are really not codified in Jewish law with clarity, because they're unknown to us, the person could be declared tameh, and then the person has to isolate from the rest of the community. If it's the home that the blemish is on, the home is closed up, no one can enter it. If it's the clothing are set aside. If it's the person themselves, the person has to leave the community and sit alone for a period of time. And we're familiar with this, for example, from the story of Miriam, the sister of Moshe and Aaron, who speaks badly, whatever that meant under those circumstances. She has a conversation with Aaron about Moshe in a way that's deemed by God to be derogatory. And hence the entire nation sits for a week while she leaves the camp and sits outside the parameters of the camp alone until she's healed of her tzorat, until she makes amends with God, and the physical symptoms of this spiritual consequence of speaking badly disappears. And then there's a purification process that we'll look at. Person re-enters society and goes on with their life. So this is a very intrusive spiritual system of God interacting with the Jewish people. And it's deemed to have taken place only at times when the Mishkan was there and God's presence was in the midst of the people, and only at certain periods of time during the temple itself, where again God's presence was manifest in the midst of the Jewish people in Yerushalayim on the Temple Mount. But it's hard for us to even imagine such a level of monitoring going on. And that brings me to a story. Story is told, and there's a couple of versions of the story. I think it's a few different people. But in the late 1920s, people would travel great distances to the small little backwater of Rodden, and they wanted to visit the Chafetz Chaim. Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Kagan, who lived there, didn't really have a position in the community. It started a yeshiva. Boys came there to learn. Many of his students survived the war and became major players in the future course of the Jewish people, including the founder of the yeshiva that I attended, the Chafetz Chaim Yeshiva in New York, because its founder, Rabbi David Leibowitz, was a great nephew of the Chafetz Chaim and came as a teenager and spent a few years studying in that yeshiva in proximity to the Chafetz Chaim. Then he went on to a different yeshiva, the Slobodka Yeshiva, to refine himself as a human being. And then he came to America in the 1920s. But when people would come to visit the Chafetz Chaim, they'd come to what was a backwater town. They'd come to a small village house. They would knock on the door. And here's the story one person recounts. I walked in and I saw a very serious rabbi sitting there studying, very quiet. He looked at me, I looked at him. I assumed to myself, wow, this must be the holy Chafetz Chaim, absorbed in Torah thinking, remote, inaccessible. And then when I addressed him, and I addressed him as the esteemed Chafetz Chaim, he smiled and said, no, that's not me. Let me bring the Chafetz Chaim out. And in came a man dressed much more simply, less rabbinically, and he was open to conversation. There was banter, there was back and forth, there was hello, where are you from? Can I get you something? Sit down. There was an open, relaxed interaction. And the visitor remarked upon himself and thought, wow, this is so odd. The Chavetz Chaim, whose reputation rested upon a book he wrote with the detailed laws of avoiding lashon hara, evil speech, and denigrating other people, he seems to be so relaxed in his speech, and yet he knows all the details and all the ramifications, and this is permitted to say, this is not permitted to say, this must be told, this can't be told, but it was part and parcel of who he was. The other rabbi who I met sitting outside, much more constrained, much more restrained, but perhaps only because he was not on firm footing in terms of having a clear sense of a yearning to interact with people. So this brings us to this idea, the topic of the class, which is social isolation. When the Torah denigrates and prohibits lashon hara, is the Torah aiming for a silent society where people are calm, they walk by each other, hello, hello, I don't want to look at you, I don't want to know what's going on with you, I don't want to interact with you, I don't want to, God forbid, say something wrong and be struck with some weird malady? Or rather, as it's described in Pirkei Avot, does the Torah envision a society where people greet each other, besaver panim yafos, with a shining countenance, where people interact with each other, where the role model is Aaron HaKohen, as Hillel says, be from the students of Aaron who seek peace, who run after it, who solve conflicts amongst people, who see themselves as a positive social interactor, who's constantly speaking and interacting and connecting with other people for the purpose of weaving society ever tighter and ever closer. And that, in fact, is the model that the rabbis say. Another Pirkei Avos is replete with this. When you greet someone with a smile, it's like giving them a glass of milk on a hot day, and referring to the whiteness of your teeth, warming the innards of another person just by greeting them properly. Another idea, be the first one to say hello, wish peace, shalom on your fellow. Don't be the one who responds, be the one who initiates. So just like the story of the visitor of the Chavetz Chaim, we see that the ideal Torah world is one of interaction, of one of closeness, of one of expression. It's not meant to be a world of social isolation. Social isolation, in fact, is a consequence of those people whose speech undermines the connectivity of society. That's what lashon hara is conceived as. It's harping on other people's negativity, vulnerability, ways of elevating myself at the expense of someone else, ways of getting a good laugh at someone else's expense, whatever the case may be. Or maybe it's just scoffing and breeding an attitude of nothing really matters, and isn't the world just a stupid upside down place? Whatever, all this falls under the category of derogatory speech. And it's all included in the paradigm of what these two Torah portions read about. And if you look in Leviticus chapter 14, sentence 4, it's on page 620 in the Stone Chumash, we see something interesting. That when a person is afflicted with this spiritual condition called tsarat, and let's just go, there are other possible causes, but let's go with this idea of speaking negatively. So pick up the narrative on chapter 14. The Kohen shall go forth to the outside of the camp because this person has been isolated. The Kohen shall look, and behold, the affliction has been healed. The Kohen shall command, and for the person to bring purified, there shall be taken 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, crimson thread, and hyssop. There's a whole procedure that takes place. But with the 2 live birds, here's what happens. One of them is slaughtered, and the blood is used as an offering. And we can understand that because as Rashi connects to the narrative here, birds chirp. They make noise with their mouths incessantly. And if you're an incessant speaker, you need to fill in the airwaves. And you're bound to just go to places that you shouldn't, or you'll bare your soul and start complaining, and this one doesn't treat me well, or that one could treat me better, I'm disappointed in so-and-so. So that bird is slaughtered. Its blood is used as an offering, And it's obviously a visual for this Metzora, this person who has been afflicted, who's been outside the camp for at least a week, sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. It's a wake-up call. What comes out of your mouth matters. Sends in Mishlei and Proverbs, life and death rests on your tongue. Those are the illustrations of that. But then the second bird is set free. It goes back to chirping. This reminds me of this story with the Chafetz Chaim. The second bird is not there to confirm or affirm that the ideal of life is to live as a hermit, socially isolated, but rather the ideal is to be mindful of one's speech and to use speech appropriately. It's a very powerful lesson. It's one that, if it's played out appropriately, the world becomes a different place. The world becomes a place of positive interaction where people are not venting so much as they're seeking to build the society and the world around them. They're seeking to build up their friend, their neighbor, their spouse, their children, people around them. They're seeking to teach ideas that are important. They're teaching to use speech as an expression and a connection. And indeed, Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz is known for harping on a statement in the Talmud. It's in the Dorim 64b, and it says basically a Metzora, a person afflicted with tzaras, choshuv kames, it's as if he's dead. Okay, now we know today that social isolation leads to death, physical death. We know the terrible consequences. The Surgeon General wrote a book about this and has issued warnings. Throughout society, especially given our dependence on artificial devices, which we think create communication, which we think are connecting, and in fact, we know now are disconnecting. So we're tuned into that. We're tuned into that this is dangerous. It's dangerous to your physical health. It's dangerous to your mental health. Life is with people was an old phrase that people used to resound to. And all that's in the context of Yoshev Bada. The Torah says the Metzora, the person afflicted with tzaras, just like Miriam for that 1 week, leaves the camp, is quiet, has no one to talk to. In fact, even has to warn people, keep your distance from me because I have an affliction, a spiritual affliction, which could infect you. So for those 7 days at a minimum, the person gets a chance to come to grips with the idea, what is it like to be isolated? And how is it that my everyday banter and interaction could in fact be breeding a sense of isolation, even for those people within society, not with the dramatic step of leaving the camp, but just daily, instead of greeting, hello, how are you? You look great today. I can't wait to have a chance to study some Torah with you. I can't wait to talk to you about some ideas that I've been thinking about. I can't wait to connect with you. Or I'm interested in hearing about the difficulties that you're encountering so that I can share your burden. Or I want to talk to you about my burdens, but I'm seeking to do so for a point of building up, not tearing down. That becomes the essence. And indeed, that's what Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes so beautifully. He says, what does it mean? What does death mean? And this is the way he explains it. These are the words he used. He says, when a person uses speech negatively, they become crippled in their ability to connect with others. These are his words written at least 50 years ago, before the media that we have today. They're blocked from sharing in another person's suffering to help them. And they have blockage in terms of being vulnerable and sharing their own burdens with another so that they could feel that sense of kindness and camaraderie. They have difficulty bestowing kindness. And then he goes on to say the essence of life is sharing, giving, growing through connection with others. And he doesn't even go on to another big topic, which is just the responsibility to teach Torah. You know, Hillel says in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot in Mishnah 13, that if a person has Torah wisdom and doesn't share it, they're deserving of death. Now, again, no one's executing anybody, but I think he's lining up this thought with this idea that the Gemara says about the person who's a Metzora. You have the gift of speech. You have the ability to speak. In a previous class, I mentioned an idea that Rabbi Dr. Tatz puts out. It says the mouth is the organ of connection. We connect with others, sharing food together, eating together. Statement in Pirkei Avot again. 3 people sit down for a meal together and they don't discuss words of Torah. If they don't have meaningful conversation, which adds value to lives, says that it's like a conclave of the dead, using the same phrase over and over again. And obviously the opposite is true. Eating together, connecting, kissing a baby, expressing love, a mother to a child, speaking appropriately. Speaking also is the opportunity to bring from within oneself something and bringing it into the world. And that ability to express oneself also has an awful lot to do with what it means to be a dignified, living, growing human being. Without these opportunities, growth is impossible. And as a different thinker put it in terms of Torah, the emphasis on chesed, on kindness, is because when you end up giving to someone else, you grow, you become bigger. Moshe became bigger by going out and interacting with the world and sharing in the suffering that he saw the Jewish people enduring and taking that to heart. It's not an example of speech, but it's an example of connection, of not squirreling away in the privileged position he was as a prince of Egypt, but rather associating himself with the difficulties, taking them to heart and connecting to the people around him. That's what makes a person bigger. And even in the secular world, I heard a quote recently, when I give something away, I have more. A really big thought, a really big idea. What are some of the underlying causes that make Lashon Hara, negative speech, an everyday occurrence? Something that we have to guard against, something that if we don't think about, we're not on the level of the Chavetz Chaim where we've ingrained all of these do's and don'ts and nuances. So one cause is arrogance. A person wants to build themselves up. And that's discussed a lot in Jewish tradition, and that the idea of being a gas ruach, of feeling a need that I dominate over everyone else. And as the famous story goes, that a rabbi once observed 2 boys, as boys do, standing, I'm Tor, no, I'm Tor, I'm Tor, I'm Tor. And then the one boy pushed the other one off into the curb, into the street, said, see, I'm taller than you. And the rabbi's comment was, that boy needs a lot of attention. That boy needs a lot of love. What he just did is a dangerous thing. It's dangerous for him because he could live his whole life pushing people off the curve so he feels taller. And what does that do for a person? It means that I'm not really growing. I'm just creating the perception that I am bigger by making you seem smaller. That's so much of what motivates us deep, deep down within ourselves. And this brings me to really last week's Torah reading and a connection that I want to make. I was listening to a shiur by Rabbi Avi Finkelstein, who lives in Israel, a person I met in Memphis, Tennessee, when he was a visiting rabbi there. And if you go back to chapter 10, last week's Parsha of Shmini, which recounts the terrible events of Aaron's 2 sons being killed because they brought a strange fire into the temple. And they were enthusiastic, they were excited, they thought that they were doing something to draw close to God. And in fact, Moshe characterizes the event as Bikrovai Kodesh. God became sanctified through those who were closest to him, who were trying to draw close to him. A topic we're not going to look at, but we're going to look at Aaron's response. The Torah says, Vayidom Aharon. If you look on page 593, the way it's typically translated, Aaron was silent. He was quiet. Now, Nachmanides jumps in right away and says, don't think he has a heart of stone. He's unfeeling. His own children just died. He was crying. He was expressing tremendous grief, but no word came out of his mouth. In that sense, Vayidom. Vayidom is a word that, to my thinking, is from the word domain, inanimate. An inanimate object, a rock, is called a domain in Hebrew. It doesn't grow. It doesn't respond to its surroundings. It just is in a state of being, unchanging. If that's an insight here, so what was going on with Aaron? Why is it that he stifled his speech? Now, again, that was his immediate reaction. It doesn't mean that over the course of the next few days he didn't sit shiva for the loss of his children. He didn't pour out his feelings and his heart to his brother and his family and people that came to visit him. I would imagine all those things happened. But at this moment, where he continued to have the responsibility to do the service in the temple in spite of his loss on this day of inauguration, he was Vayidom Aharon. Aaron was unresponsive. That's the way I want to translate the word in a fanciful way. What does that mean? So Rabbi Avi Finkelstein pointed out a source. It's a poem, really, a poem written 1,000 years ago in Hebrew. And it has the following two lines. Kisha'ani medaber davor, humo shall be. Ukisha'ini medaber bo, ani mo shall bo. And the translation is as follows. When I say something, having come out of my mouth, those words now become they rule over me. I've made a statement. I've expressed myself. I've drawn from within myself something. If it's anger, or if it's, God forbid, rejection of God, or a sense of contradicting everything that I stand on, those words themselves, they have a certain dominance over me. They reframe who I am. But when I'm silent, when I restrain my speech, that's an example of me dominating over, controlling over, exercising control over my feelings at this moment so that I can sit with those feelings a bit longer and I can sort them out before I begin to characterize them. Now, please understand, misapplied, this could be the worst possible advice that anyone could get, because it's not a question of suppressing your humanity. And that's where the commentary of Nachmanides is so important. Aaron was grief struck. His children were precious to him. He had 4 boys, and 2 of them just died. He was crying, expressing grief through his tears. But he wasn't going to speak about it because he wanted more time. He wanted to quiet himself within so that he could assess what his real reaction is, what his real thoughts are, what perhaps is the best channel and direction to process what just happened. And only then would he express himself, understanding, as this Hebrew poem states, that because there are times when I'll speak something out and that becomes dominant over me. I'm creating a world when I speak. I'm using a very human trait, which if you go back to Genesis chapter 3, chapter 2, sentence 7, where the Torah says that God breathed a nishmat chaim, a soul, into the being he was creating, Adam. Vayhi ha'adam lenefesh cha, and he became alive. So the Onkelos translates that as he became a speaking being. And again, connecting profoundly the opportunity and the ability to communicate with life itself. It's the essence of life, is this opportunity to communicate. But before these words come out from within us, we have the capacity to quiet ourselves, to take, and the way I see this, to take an inner accounting, an inner processing. And I want to say something psychologically, we know when people suffer tremendous trauma and grief, they lose the ability to speak. This is documented. I think many of us have experienced it in our own lives. There's a certain point where we're not able to speak in terrible situations of abuse. It can take people years to be able to articulate words about what took place because their mind is so traumatized by what happened that it's frozen, the ability to formulate words, to express anything. Perhaps it could be understood that Aaron at this moment made himself quiet, made himself inanimate so that he could come to grips and assess himself and his tragedy and how it fits in with his worldview. He could express grief through tears, but he held back words because words are so powerful. And that's what I want to connect now, words and actions. First of all, words are an action. We entered the month of Iyar. Today was Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And as Rabbi Sensino pointed out to me in school today, it's the only month on the Jewish calendar where each and every day has an added mitzvah for the season. In other words, we celebrate Pesach for 7 days during the Chodesh Nisan. We have special mitzvah. We celebrate Sukkot. We celebrate Shavuot. We mark anniversaries. We do all kinds of things. But the counting of the Svira is a mitzvah from the Torah, the counting that we do from the second night of Pesach, which leads us up to the Shavuot and celebrating Matan Torah, which ultimately is an expression of the yearning of the Jewish people to take their physical freedom and then to receive the Torah and gain spiritual freedom on top of physical freedom so that they could live their lives in fulfillment of everything God would like people to see in people. We have that mitzvah every day here. It's a mitzvah of speaking. How do we fulfill it? We make a blessing, and then we count. Today is, whatever the day happens to be, 30 days, not 30 days now, which is 4 weeks and 2 days in the Omer. So again, we use this magnificent opportunity to utter words, doing a mitzvah. Many mitzvahs we have are speaking, saying the Shema every day. But this is a mitzvah that falls every day during this month of Iyar. And it's an ennobling opportunity for us to latch on to that excitement that the Jewish people felt when they left Egypt. And they knew that they would count 7 weeks, 49 days and 7 full weeks, and then they would arrive at Mount Sinai and God would reveal God's presence to the whole Jewish people, and they would receive a Torah in a unique event in human history. And they were excited, and the natural sense was, it's 1 day towards that, 2 days, 3 days. We're counting up to 49 so that we'll be ready, so that we can finally arrive at this destination and we can experience that great revelation at Sinai. That's what animated them. And it's contained within a mitzvah, which means take your human capacity to speak and simply express it. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, and who sanctified us with the counting of the Omer. That's what we call it. And then we count the days, something that's endemic to this entire month. It's a beautiful expression of that. It's an expression that we can share with others and say, hey, in another few weeks, it's going to be Shavuot, and we're going to re-experience receiving the most precious gift the world has ever known, the Torah. Isn't that great? Isn't it wonderful that we share this legacy? Isn't it fantastic that we can study together, share ideas together? We can live our lives within the framework that the Torah gives us. And isn't that exciting for us? and we express that through speech. There's a danger that speech can become in lieu of action. And this is another source of Lashon Hara, where I'm too tired to study, I'm too tired to read, and I'm too tired to go and visit someone who's in need. So what I'll do is I'll make up stories, or I'll point things out around me, or I'll denigrate others, which build myself up and make it look like, wow, look what a great life I had. I'll post things out for other people just for the hope that I'll arouse a little jealousy. People will say, wow, look what's going on in his life. Isn't he lucky? And again, there's good reasons for doing all these things too. I'm not trying to characterize what everyone does. I just want to point out that the real work is Adam Nifal Lafi Pu'osav. People are shaped by what the actions they take. And when we take the action of devoting our speech to upbuilding life, to connecting with other people, to doing kindness for other people, and then doing kindness also physically doing the kindness, not just talking about being kind, not just offering a smile, but really being ready to bear the burden and share in other people's difficulties, then we are really on our way to making our mouths into a source of connection. We're on our way to becoming, to some figment, like the Chafetz Chaim, a person who could interact easily with other people, stayed on safe ground, expressed himself in a way which was beneficial for himself in making the world a brighter, more wonderful, more connected place, and beneficial for the person who he was speaking to. We study Pirkei Avot now, and I was taken by surprise myself when I see that Hillel teaches that if you have a learning of Torah and you don't share it with others, chapter 1, Mishnah 13, I think, you don't deserve to live. A wild statement. But in other words, we are like the second bird that gets released. And to go back to that original source, Leviticus chapter 14, sentence 4, the question that's asked is, okay, we offer one bird. Why do we let the other bird go free? So it can go back to chattering. After all, wasn't the purpose of slaughtering the first bird the idea of explaining or demonstrating the fact that idle chatter is dangerous? And the answer that's given is yes, there's a danger involved. It needs to be taken seriously. But then the second bird is released back into the wild so that it can chatter and it can chirp, so that when we wake up in the morning, we can hear a bird singing and it can uplift us and we can say, what a beautiful world Hashem has created. And that bird's voice enhances the world, makes us more appreciative of all the blessings that Hashem is bestowing upon us. So that's the two birds we use when we atone for the Metzora, for the person who is afflicted with tsaras. One bird is slaughtered and its blood is sprinkled on the altar to show, wow, life and death is here. I could end up isolated. I can end up creating isolation. I can end up becoming a source for a major problem that is endemic to the society in which we live now, and which our children suffer from so much. The inability to speak to someone, the need, I'll text them. Why should I use my mouth? Why should I speak? The opportunity, the second bird, set free, so that we can say, but we have this amazing faculty to brighten the world, to make it a better place, to speak words of Torah that help us fulfill our purpose, to teach ourselves and others what is good speech and what isn't good speech. And then to ride this out in a sense where our every smile, our every word, and please God, our every action is growing ourselves and growing the world in a way where people are more connected, less isolated, more built up together, because that is the society that the Torah aims to create. It's not a time, a place of withdrawal where each person lives in a hermit afraid to, God forbid, do something wrong. But it's a life of social interaction, of social connection. It's a life of give and take, where even our taking, when we ask someone to help us work through our own burdens, and we use our speech to do that, and we share our disappointments, our worries in an appropriate way with somebody else. So we're taking their time, we're inviting them into our lives, but we're both going to emerge as bigger people, more connected, better able to live in Hashem's world, connected to one another, and ultimately connected to Hashem as well. That's what these two parshiot of the Torah, the ideas are remote, the idea of a physical affliction is remote. Even the idea of these two birds is nothing that we can so easily visualize, but we can visualize the Metzora sitting isolated outside the camp for 7 days, coming to grips with what I've done that's anti-social and that's been negative, and then returning with the resolve that I'm going to take these two birds and they're going to be my example. The bird that represents idle, evil, derogatory speech, it's going to be slaughtered and its blood is going to be consecrated on the altar. And the bird who has hopefully had the time to reflect, to process, and to emerge purified, that bird gets set free so that it can brighten the world and make the world a better place and give us each the opportunity to grow alongside one another in fulfillment of the Torah. And please God, we should learn how and why and when to use our speech in this way.